Pokemon Legends ZA reintroduced Mega Evolutions to the mainline games after being absent for a while, but since Mega Evolutions has appeared, there's been also several other mechanics and gimmicks that have come in its place. So as we're reacquainted with the old, I think it's now a good time to reflect on all of these mechanics against one another, because who knows, maybe one of these old mechanics may show up again. Well, we know they're showing up again in Pokemon Champions, but to the extent that Mega Evolution is in Legends ZA. As I reflect on these, there's kind of three main things that I had in mind looking at each of them, and that's concept, casual, and competitive. Concept is just, hey, is this a really cool concept? Is it fun to engage with and interact with? Pokemon is a role-playing game after all, so us as the player, is it a cool experience for us to be able to have with ourselves and our fictional creatures that we travel with? Casual refers to how the mechanic works in the base game. So from your hometown all the way to the champion, how does it feel? Is it a good time? Is it fun? Is it integrated well? Do we get plenty of experiences with it? And I'll also bring up the lore as well, and if it integrates well into the story. And then of course competitive, that's your number crunching. That is, hey, does it shake up the formula of Pokemon battling as a whole in a fun and unique, interesting way? I'm going to be tackling these in order of release, so let's talk about the one that's now the focus of this most recent game, Mega Evolution.
Mega Evolution, mega powerful. When holding a Mega Stone, select Pokemon have the power to Mega Evolve.
With the bond between trainer and Pokemon, the energy will allow your partner to extend past its natural limits and create a new form. Obviously, the Mega Evolution changing to a new form is easily the coolest part, and it's really fun, especially because it gives a bunch of older Pokemon a new chance to have a fresh coat of paint on, and I really like that. I also like that lore-wise, it is tied directly to the bond between trainer and Pokemon. One of the core themes that's explored in Pokemon as a whole is our relationship with humanity and nature. And I find it really fascinating, especially because the origin of Mega Evolution is tied to the ultimate weapon. It is the byproduct of this horrible weapon that was used, and that energy creating these new forms for Pokemon. And of course, these new forms, as stated in a few of the Pokédex entries, can sometimes even be painful. But it is specifically with that bond between the trainer and Pokemon that they're willing to extend past their natural limits for that temporary bit of time so that they can achieve their goal in the heat of battle. And I think that is super fun. X and Y are the games that introduced Mega Evolutions to the series, but I feel like it's a little limited in terms of the Mega Evolutions that you can see. It's a huge shame because there are 30 Mega Evolution that are added to X and Y, and only 8 of them are available before the post game. And other than the main character, there's only 4 trainers that use Mega Evolution. That being the champion, the evil team leader, the rival, and Karina, who gives you a Mega Evolved Pokemon for free. So if we ignore the overlap of Karina's Mega Lucario, we are seeing 11 Mega Evolved Pokemon out of 30 throughout the main course of the game, which is a huge shame, especially because in terms of team building, us as the player, we want to be able to try out the new Mega Evolutions. It's the whole new mechanic. We want to experience it. That's also why it baffles me that they took 12 years to give Mega Evolutions to the Kalos starters. That should have been one of the first ones on the design room floor. Well, not the floor. Put it up on the board. Put it up on the board. Take it off the floor, put it up on the board. Most people will use their starter in their playthrough, so I think it only makes sense that we allow the starter to have access to this new mechanic so that the majority of players can experience it. And yes, I understand that they give Kanto starters after the first gym, but in terms of team building, it just makes it feel even more limited. Most folks are going to use their new starter. Most folks are going to use their first chance at the Mega Evolution that they can, and then they have like 4 other options. And then on top of that, since there's not that many Mega Evolved Pokemon that you can get throughout the natural course of the game, It's just kind of a bummer, and I feel like through your casual playthrough, even though it's talked about a lot, and even though there's certain locations that are tied to it, like the Tower of Mega Evolution, and even how it's tied to the ultimate weapon in the climax of the game, it just doesn't feel like it's showcased as much, and it's a huge bummer. I do think Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire fix a lot of that, as your starter is capable of Mega Evolving. There's 22 Mega Stones that you can find before the Primal Kyogre or Primal Groudon fight. So you have a lot more options, and having more access for team building and using different Mega Evolved Pokemon is a good thing, and I really like that. And also, while it's still limited who use Mega Evolution, when you rematch the Hoenn Elite Four, they start using Mega Evolution as well. Why they didn't do that in X and Y, I don't know. As for the competitive side of things, I think Mega Evolution is pretty interesting. It is tied to your item slot, and when you Mega Evolve, you get higher stats, most Pokemon change their ability, and some of them change their type. So it does shake things up enough, and especially with the ability side, there are some times where you may want to go, hey, let me wait to Mega Evolve. I think a prime example is Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan has Scrappy, but once it Mega Evolves, it doesn't. So you may be like, okay, I want to be able to use Fake Out on a Ghost-type Pokemon before I Mega Evolve and lose this. And especially with the Pokemon of other types, it'd be great to Mega Evolve when you can, for the sake of type compatibility. But I think because it's such a huge stat buff and there's no limit to Mega Evolution, like it's not going to expire through the course of a battle, 9 out of 10 times you kind of want to Mega Evolve as soon as possible, which is just kind of a bummer because it's like, oh, can we just do this all the time? It doesn't add a whole lot in terms of strategy is the main thing I'm saying, since most of the time you want to try to Mega Evolve as soon as you can, so you can take advantage of all of those buffs. I think overall Mega Evolution is still really cool. Like I said, mostly just for the new forms. That is absolutely what's carrying Mega Evolution as a whole. But even with just the new forms, I think there's still a lot to enjoy about Mega Evolution. Now Z moves, they leave a little to be desired, to say the least. Did you know that Z stands for Zenith, meaning highest or fullest? Like your highest move. Z moves are tied to Z power, and it is an energy throughout the air that the trainer is able to harness when it does the proper pose tied with the Z crystal, so that your Pokemon can unleash an all-powerful attack once per battle. In terms of concept, I think it is really cool in a vacuum to have this one really powerful attack that you can use when the time calls for it. It feels very like, I'm on my last leg, I have to go all out, and I think that's cool. In terms of like power fantasy, that is a cool thing to do. And like I said, especially with Mega Evolution, I like that there's the bond. I like that the trainer does the pose. In a way, it's almost like the trainer is getting into the battle themselves, where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this pose and I'm going to help my Pokemon. And I really like that. I really like that. But in terms of like the gameplay, it's, like I said, it leaves stuff to be desired. Throughout your playthrough, you will run into every single type of Z crystal except for the Flynium Z, just by playing the game, which is cool, especially in terms of accessibility that I felt was lacking with the Mega Stones. But it doesn't have too much fun tied to it. One-shotting a Pokemon isn't the hardest thing to do without a Z Crystal, and with the Z Crystal only just making your move stronger, it leaves a lot to be desired. You also get a lot more options in terms of Z Crystals for your various Pokemon, as it is just tied to the type of move. And while the animations for the Z moves are really cool and have like a certain power fantasy to them, since every single Pokemon needs to be able to do it, it's just kind of a bummer. It gets old a little fast, and that's not good. It should feel like this big flashy moment, but it just kind of falls flat after a while. And even as you're collecting more Z crystals, yes, you are checking off the objective of, oh, I got the next one. It doesn't feel as like, ooh, about it versus like a new Mega Stone. Now, there are unique Z crystals tied to specific Pokemon. So especially in terms of animation, they are able to have a lot more personality tied to it, because instead of having to have hundreds of Pokemon be applicable to that crystal, they can go, hey, this is for this one Pokemon, we can have a lot more fun with it. And those are really, really cool. But it still kind of falls into that same application of it's just big number, big damage. And that feels really sad. It just doesn't feel very good. Especially because the unique Z crystals are extremely limited. There's only 17 of them. But with those unique Z crystals, they have secondary effects. And that's one of the main things that I feel like almost all the Z crystals should have had, is some sort of secondary effect to make it feel like more than just big number, big damage. But even then, of the Z crystals, 6 of them don't even have secondary effects. But like I mentioned, it's integrated well into the course of the story, and like I said, is specifically tied to Alola because of the Z power that is tied to the Ultra Wormholes, is where it believes that it comes from. So overall, okay, cool. On the competitive side, I think it just comes down to the same issue. It's just big number, big damage. And especially because it takes up an item slot and you only get once per turn, you're not going to want to have Z crystals on many of your Pokemon because, oh, I'm losing my item and I have to make sure I want this Pokemon to be able to use this Z move. So you never like fill out your entire team with Z crystals. And especially because the Alola games still have Mega Evolutions and it is tied to the post game and you can't access it through the main story. Competitively, the Z moves don't even have like as much of a spotlight, so it just kind of falls flat. And it's a huge shame because Z moves should have like the main focus here, but it's fighting its cooler older brother in terms of the spotlight the entire time. I do think the main thing is if Z moves had secondary effects, that would change a lot of it, especially because, like I mentioned, the Z moves do make big number, big damage, but if it is a status move, the majority of them just increase stats. And that's it. There's only like a handful of them where it's not just a stat increase. So overall, it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of like fun, interesting mechanics in terms of that. Yes, it gives you another option when you're playing the game, and especially in terms of item slot, but it doesn't feel as like ground shaking as Mega Evolution was. But you know what would shake the ground? That big kaiju walking. It's coming. It's shaking everything. Oh no! Ah! So Dynamax is pretty cool. Dynamax is my Pokemon gets really big. And that's kind of cool, especially because there's also Gigantamax, so it comes back to the form transformations that you will experience with Mega Evolutions, which I like. It gives more of a spotlight to old Pokemon. In terms of like the concept and like power fantasy side of things, it doesn't feel like as fun as Mega Evolution, especially because it's not tied to the bond. Specifically, Dynamax is tied to what's known as power spots, which is the leftover remnants of Eternatus's energy, and those power spots allow Pokemon to grow really large. While it bums me out that it's not tied to the bond with Pokemon like before, I do like that it is integrated well into Sword and Shield in terms of Galar's world. I do think there's a lot of fair criticism for Sword and Shield, but I do think one of the things they really excelled at was giving the spectacle of battles and gym battles. It really makes it feel like this region's whole thing is the competitive spirit of Pokemon battling. Even the gyms are built on top of these power spots because they know that that would make the spectacle of battling so much bigger. Battling so much bigger. Literally in this case, which is really, really awesome. Throughout the course of the game, you're going to be interacting with Dynamax every single time you're at a gym battle, which is pretty cool. I actually like that in this game, Dynamax is tied to very specific locations, being the gym battles and the raids that you run into, because it doesn't dull that mechanic. Because you're not overexposed to it, it's not an issue. Z moves and Mega Evolutions being tied to an item, you can just use those on any battle that you run into, but sometimes less is more. So with Dynamax being tied to these specific like raids and boss battles, it does give it a bit more of an oomph and gravitas to it. And like I said, you're going to be running into this every single time you do a gym battle, and it adds to that perspective. And since Dynamax is tied to every single Pokemon, you're never worrying about team building or items and stuff like that, and you can experience this feature right away. There is the Gigantamax forms, which I do have a little criticism with. In terms of the Gigantamax forms, you will be running into those starting with the 3rd gym, and every single boss fight after that, you will see the new Gigantamax forms, which is pretty cool. But as the player, I feel like unless you are specifically looking for Gmax forms, you're not going to be running into them, because the Gmax forms are tied specifically to the dens in the wild area. This isn't inherently bad, but the main thing is, if you catch a Rookidee on Route 1 and you evolve it all the way to a Corviknight, it doesn't have the Gigantamax mark. See, it's not tied to just, oh, this Pokemon is always going to Gigantamax. It's tied to this mark, and you have to catch a Pokemon that already has that mark, which is a huge shame, because unless, like I said, you're going out of your way to do it, you're not going to be finding any of these Pokemon with the Gigantamax. If you go throughout the course of the story, you will not run into a Gigantamax Pokemon. You have to do that on your own, which, like, that's fine, but it just is a little bit of a bummer. And like I said, especially with the bonds that you have with your old Pokemon, it just feels bad to be like, well, this Rookidee that I trained from the very beginning, I have to get rid of because Corviknight will spread its wings and fly when it turns big. Obviously, this is remedied in the DLC where you can drink the Dynamax soup, and then that allows you to have the Gigantamax form to that Pokemon. But still, it's just kind of a little bit of a bummer, because it's like, oh, you couldn't have done that to begin with? I think especially the starters. Once again, the starters should have access to the new gimmick. Most people are going to use the starters. Let them have the new gimmick. Yes, the Galar starters got the Gigantamax form in the DLC, but why weren't they in the base game? And why didn't Leon give us the starters with the Gigantamax ability? Leon's ability to get lost is so strong that a cab driver in Lumiose managed to start getting lost, and Leon was just in the back seat. So can we not just say Leon got lost in a Dynamax den and went, wow, there's the Galar starters and they can turn into big mode? It would have been nice, is all I'm saying. In terms of the competitive side of thing, I think Dynamax is pretty cool overall, and especially with max moves, I think it fixes some of my issues with Z moves specifically, and because Dynamax is on a timer, it fixes one of my issues with Mega Evolution. Very cool. So because Dynamax's whole point is that it is these larger than life versions of the Pokemon we know, each of their moves become what's known as max moves, and each of the max moves are simply based on type, and the power scales based on the power of the base. But with each of those types, there's a secondary ability that affects the whole battlefield, which is super cool. Some of them are stat changes, some of them are weather conditions, sometimes the terrain changes, and that's really cool because it shakes up the whole thing. And every single status move is just simply turned into a protect. Part of my issue with the Z move status moves was that it was usually always just a stat buff, but I think just making every single stat move a max protect is okay, mostly because a regular protect against a Dynamax Pokemon is only going to take away some of the damage, but having a max protect will allow an entire turn of Dynamax to be gone away. And as I mentioned, Dynamax is on a timer, so specifically in the course of the battle, and especially since every Pokemon can Dynamax, you really have to think, okay, when am I going to use this? I think that option always in your back pocket of, hey, let's change things up, is a good thing overall. And like I said, since it's not tied to an item, there's a lot more you can do in terms of team building, and I think that's really cool. The Gigantamax forms are pretty cool in terms of their max moves because they actually have G-max moves. So it changes the type like before, but the secondary effect changes, which I think is a really fun way of making these Gigantamax forms have something unique to them. I think my personal favorite is Lapras. I really like G-Max Resonant because it adds Aurora Veil, and you don't even need Hail. I think that's really cool, and for that reason, that's why I liked using Gigantamax Lapras. And I like that it adds more of that option, because obviously you could just use regular Lapras and take advantage of the max move for Ice types, so that you can set up Hail, or you could decide, hey, I want to use G-Max Resonant so I can get Aurora Veil. I think both of those are really interesting options in terms of team building. Now, unlike Mega Evolution, some of the Mega Evolutions, Dynamax does not change ability or type. But our next feature, that's the name of the game. Terastallization allows the Pokemon to change their type. Simple as that. And at least in terms of concept, that sounds pretty cool. But it definitely is lacking, especially compared to all of the other features that we've done. It doesn't really feel like that much of a ooh, look at this, especially because at least when I think about Pokemon changing their types, it is, hey, look at this whole new design. But instead, to show the type, and this is definitely because they have to do it for hundreds of Pokemon, when they change the type, they just add a little hat, or they call it a jewel, but they have a little hat on. And that's to signify the type change. And the thing is, it's pretty simple, but because types for Pokemon have been so set in stone for the most part throughout the course of Pokemon since its inception, it is really cool to take one of the core foundations of Pokemon and shake it up that way. In some of my research for this video, most of it is just my innate Pokemon knowledge, but I actually read that Terastallization was found in Pokemon World 140 years ago, but it was only 10 years ago in the Pokemon World where people have been able to terastallize outside of Area 0, and that's because the professor made the Terra Orb. Did not know it was that recent, but that's pretty cool. The Terra type is tied to location, so specifically Paldea can do it because of Area 0, Kitakami can do it because of the Crystal Pool, and then Blueberry Academy can do it because of their terrarium and having their big old crystal orb in the center. Let's put crystal orbs everywhere, how about that? But I kind of like that there's this explanation for why nowhere else is able to use it, especially because it was yeah, we knew about this for a while, but we just managed to be able to make this work in Paldea, so I think that's pretty cool. In terms of your playthrough throughout the game, you're going to be experiencing Terastallization everywhere you go. You literally see it before your 3 main quests even begin when you fight Nemona for the second time, and the player gets access to Terastallization before the 3 quests begin. So that's pretty cool, you get access to it right away. But I do think the execution in the base game is a little bit of a bummer. Each of the gym leaders will terastallize their last Pokemon, but instead of doing anything interesting with the mechanic, they take their ace Pokemon, which is not their type specialty, and then they turn it into their type specialty. I do think this is a really poor execution for how Terra type should be. We should be able to see some crazy Terra type changes happening throughout the course of the game, but instead we don't really have to think on it. It's just, oh, I know the opponent's going to be their specialty type anyway. And Pokemon is never really an especially hard game, but it would be nice if during the water gym, for example, as Kofu is a chef, maybe he uses the fire Terra type because you need heat for cooking, and at least for 2 seconds, you as the player can go, there's a bit of a wrench in my plan. I wonder what I'm gonna do. I think the only times in the base game I liked it was specifically Iono using the Electric Terra type on her Mismagius with Levitate, as now her ace Pokemon has no weaknesses. That one was pretty cool, and I liked Brassius with his truly Wudo pseudo Wudo, because that's funny. And sometimes that's what you need in Pokemon. There are other trainers that don't have specialty types, but they just terastallize their Pokemon into their primary type. Mechanically, yes, their stab moves go from a 1.5 boost to a 2 times boost, but it's just kind of lacking. And there are some times where it's like, okay, you drop your secondary type, so there's less of a weakness there. But once again, it just kind of goes to, hey, maybe we could have changed it up just a little bit. There's only 3 characters that change Terra types completely in interesting ways, and they're all behind Blueberry Academy. That is Kieran with his Hydrapple becoming a fighting type, Geeta with her King Gambit becoming a flying type, and Cyrano becoming a rock type superior. Also in the game's code, Rhyme's Bayonet is a steel Terra type, which is really interesting because you're never going to experience that, as she will always terastallize her toxicity. But okay. I do think it's a bit of a bummer because the player also doesn't have many opportunities to use anything unique for terastallization. You have to specifically catch a Pokemon that already has a different Terra type, as your Pokemon innately just have their primary type as their Terra type. There are some static encounters in the world that you will find that have a set Pokemon and a set Terra type. I know specifically before you fight the Cloth Titan, there is a Water Terra type Jigglypuff, but that's going to be there every single time. The other option is doing the Terra Raids, where you can find a Pokemon of a different type, which does give more options for variability. Okay, but overall, you're not finding specifically what you want most of the time. If you want to find what you specifically want, or make your Pokemon specifically what you want Terra type wise, you will have to grind for the Terra Shards, which are found exclusively from the raids. You'll have to go to Malie and exchange 50, but each raid gives anywhere from 5 to 7 shards. So it's going to take a little bit, and especially at the higher ranks, which give the higher rewards, it's a bit of a slog. It's a bit of a time sink to get those shards. So at least in a casual playthrough, most people aren't going to change their Terra types unless they found a Pokemon in the wild or in one of the raids where it was like, okay, this one's interesting, cool, I'll do it. Which is kind of a bummer, especially because competitively, I think Terra type is the best gimmick in the series. Ta-da! I would say I have a 1.5 modifier for water type moves, but I'm actually a Pisces, so this makes it a 2 times multiplier. Competitively, I think being able to change your Terra type on the fly is so interesting, especially since you have access to every single type. There are so many options in terms of team building, and also competitively, since every single Pokemon can do it without having to worry about an item, you get so many chances where you can mind game your opponent. Hey, am I going to Terra type to something that would take no damage from your Dragon type move? Hey, am I going to use it now, or am I going to wait for one of my other Pokemon? Okay, my opponent used it early, I lost it. Cool, now I have so much more advantage. It is just really, really cool, and I love Terra types competitively. Like I said, it is easily the best competitive wise for the series, just because how it takes one of the core mechanics that has been there since day one for Pokemon and shakes it up that much. Oh, it's so cool. Terra types, because of just how fun and interesting it was to the competitive scene for me, I actually worked my way up the online ladder to get to Master Ball tier. Not very far, but I did, and I even went to a in-person regional so I can compete. And yeah, you're looking at a 1-4 win-loss ratio champion. But I did it. I didn't commit to it because of like time, money, energy, the whole like. But it was really cool that this one feature I thought was so interesting that it got me to look into the competitive scene as a whole in that way. I had played competitive Pokemon online through Showdown or maybe built a team here or there. But Terastallization specifically really spoke to me. And it was just so interesting how things changed up. And I really, really liked it. And while I definitely think competitively it is my absolute favorite, I think my favorite is the one I want to talk about just one more time. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Pokemon Legends ZA reintroduced Mega Evolution, and as a concept, it's the same song and dance, and I really like most of the new Mega Evolutions. I also like that it's tied to the events of X and Y. It was the ultimate weapon going off again that caused this energy for more Mega Pokemon to show up. And I think that's really interesting. Competitively, Mega Evolution in this format is completely changed because we are now in a real-time battle situation instead of a turn-based one. So Mega Evolution is changed in a few ways as well. Specifically being, when you Mega Evolve, you actually get invincibility frames, and since it's real time, you may want to wait to try to avoid an attack by Mega Evolving. And then it is also built on a timer, and because there's that timer factor, it goes into the same thing of, oh, when am I going to Mega Evolve? Which I felt like was one of my big issues with Mega Evolving mechanically in X and Y and Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. Obviously, the competitive scene is very different as well, as the online competition ladder is just a free-for-all and it's focusing on last hits, but I still think because of the timing aspect of Mega Evolution, it does add a little bit of variety instead of just always wanting to do it the first chance you get. But I feel like it is on the casual playthrough, your single player experience, where Mega Evolution really shines. You have so many options for Mega Evolution in Legends ZA, and you run into so many Pokemon that your opponent uses as well, even to the point where just average trainers you run into in the battle zone use Mega Evolution, which I feel like is such a wonderful change from X and Y, where, like I said, there were only 4 trainers that used Mega Evolution. And it's just really cool, and it shows like how integrated Mega Evolution is into this world. I also like story-wise the Rogue Mega Evolution. It ties into that idea of humanity and nature and the bond that we have through it, as the Prism Tower is causing Pokemon to evolve without trainers, and we know it puts extreme stress on their body, so it kind of goes back into that main theme, the whole main theme of Pokemon, our relationship as people with nature, and I really, really like that. I mean, yeah, it's heartbreaking, but I like it as a storytelling, you know? Overall, I think Mega Evolution is just done so well in its return in Legends ZA, and it's just so much fun. And I think to the final act of the game, and how you team up with Zygarde and Mega Evolve in that final moment in order to take out the Prism Tower. And it's interesting because Zygarde unlocks a new move when they Mega Evolve, and Lysander even compares it to Z moves. And especially with stuff like that, it really makes the mechanics of Pokemon feel really a part of the world. Just bringing up something like that, like, oh, it reminds me of Z moves in Alola, it doesn't feel as isolated. It's easy to point out these mechanics as gimmicks just because they're often isolated to the games that they came in, but since other trainers are bringing up these mechanics, it makes it feel like it's a living part of the Pokemon world. And I really like that, because ultimately my favorite thing about Pokemon is that world, the characters in it, and the Pokemon in it. And I think that's also why I like Mega Evolution and Gigantamax to an extent the most, just because we get new forms, we get new opportunities to see the Pokemon we love in new light, and overall, I think it's really, really fun. And with Pokemon Champions eventually coming out, we're gonna have all of them in the same game. So, who knows? Maybe that'll be super fun. Or it'll be a nightmare. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love Pokemon and I love talking about it. So hooray.